morning. Let me start this morning by saying that, as I think you all know, I'm doing a series of lectures on the Fukanzazengi, and I'm messing up the numbering. So if someone happens to be watching this lecture after the fact, and you're trying to follow along with the numbers, the person who's posting these lectures on YouTube has got the numbers correct. But if you listen to me, I don't always necessarily have the right number. So that's just a little disclaimer, but I'm doing my best. And I believe that this is talk number 8. So here's where we are. I'm talking about the Fukanzazengi, which are Dogen's instructions on sitting zazen. He wrote, practice, realization is naturally undefiled. Going forward in practice is a matter of everydayness. In general, this world and other worlds as well, both in India and China, equally hold the Buddha seal. And overall prevails the character of the school, which is simply devotion to sitting, total engagement in a mobile sitting. So that's what I want to talk about today. So let's start out by talking about this really super important concept for Dogen, which is practice realization. And in Japanese, it's shu-so is what practice realization is. So practice is an expression of realization. So shu is practice, and sho means proof, evidence, certificate, verify. So sometimes it's practice verification. Usually it's either practice realization, the translation, or it's going to be practice verification. And in this case, it has the connotation of evidence of inherent realization. So I found this super interesting. And in the Soto Zen Text Project new translation of the Shobogenzo, this practice is the realization, this verification is talking about inherent realization. Okay, so what does that mean? So inherent realization is that we are all Buddha nature. It's that simple. So sometimes I think it's confusing. We say practice realization, and then I'll talk about this a little more, but in Bendoa, Dogen wrote, now to think that practice and verification, and this verification be understood as inherent realization are Buddha nature. Okay, so he would be saying now to think that practice and this inherent realization are not one is a view of other paths. In the Buddha Dharma, practice, and I've retranslated realization as inherent realization. Practice and inherent realization are identical. Okay, so we practice because this realization of which we already are is, as I've said before, is the motivating factor, if you will, the driver, if you will, of our practice. So we're not practicing as a way to attain realization, we're practicing as a way to, as a expression of this inherent realization. And then to continue quoting from Bendoa, Dogen said, even now, because it is practice based on inherent realization, the pursuit of the way by the beginner is the complete embodiment of original inherent realization. For this reason, in giving cautionary advice on practice as well, it is taught not to expect inherent realization outside of practice. So we shouldn't expect that we are going to engage with this Buddha nature, we're going to manifest Buddha nature outside of practice. So practice here does not just talk about formal practice. So it's not just about sitting zazen or just about coming to the zendo. This is everything you do in your life is practice. So everything you do in your life is this opportunity to manifest what is already present which is Buddha presencing, which is your Buddha nature, the nature of being Buddha. And of course, the nature of being a Buddha is nothing more or less than this continuous activity of everything functioning and co-functioning with each other throughout time and space endlessly. And that is, and the fact that that cooperative activity is a manifestation of Buddha nature. So we're already the nature of a Buddha. And then he said, we should know that in order to avoid defiling the inherent realization inseparable from practice, the Buddhas and ancestors repeatedly teach us not to relax our practice. So we should know that in order to avoid defiling the inherent realization or defiling this practice realization, separate from practice, so that would be defiling inherent realization is not to practice. So the two of them are together. The Buddhas and ancestors repeatedly teach us not to relax our practice. Okay, so that's what Dogen has to say about this in Bendawa. And it's interesting, actually, much of what he says in Fukanzazengi is in Bendawa. Almost, Bendawa means talk on pursuing the way. And it's some of the wording is virtually identical as what shows up in the Fukanzazengi. They're written really close to each other. Okay, so practice realization is naturally undefiled. So the line is practice realization is naturally undefiled. So what does it mean to say naturally undefiled? In Shobogenzo-zazengi, Principles of Seated Meditation, he ends the text with a similar statement. He said, seated meditation is non-defiling practice realization. Seated meditation is non-defiling practice realization. So what's he talking about here? Undefiled, the word he's using in Japanese for undefiled is fuzennen. And fuzennen means something's not dyed, stained, tainted, polluted, or impure. So that's what he's talking about when he says undefiled. And this term specifically refers to a dialogue between Huineng, the sixth ancestor of Zen, of our lineage, the sixth ancestor, and his student, Nanyue. So I want to tell you the story here between the two of them, so you get the background of this undefiled, which Dogen uses a lot, and usually doesn't refer to specifically the story. He just says, he'll just say undefiled and not defiled. So you have to know that it's about this story. Okay, here's the story. When Nanyue first visited the sixth ancestor, Master Huineng, Master Huineng said to him, "Where do you come from?" And Nanyue answered the question the way probably most of us would. He said, "I came from the national teacher on Mount Song." And we'd say, yeah, I came from Capitola, or I came from Ocean Gate, or I used to practice blah, blah, blah with this teacher. So then Huineng, Master Huineng says back to him, "What thing is it that thus comes like this?" What? He says, "What thing is it that comes like this?" And it's often translated as, what is it that thus comes? Okay, so, now we're on a totally different level than where did you come from, right? And this is so Zen, right? It's like you think you're talking to somebody about one thing, and all of a sudden you discover you're actually talking about something else, which actually are not different from each other, but it's sort of a different path, it's like coming in from this side or this side. So Nanyue is coming this way, Huineng's coming this way. So Nanyue, of course, could not answer this question. And then it says, and so he became a student of Huineng's. And then after 8 years, Nanyue he's been working on this, trying to answer this question to himself during these 8 years. So he finally thinks he's figured out what it is. And he goes to Huineng and he says, I understand what you put to me when I first came. What thing is it that comes like this? And Master Waiting asked, well, how do you understand it? And then Nanwei replied, to say it is like anything wouldn't hit it. To say it is like anything would not hit the mark, would not be the right answer. And then Master Wei Ning said, does it nevertheless depend on practice verification? Does it nevertheless depend on practice verification? Okay, this is practice realization. And Nanyue answered, it's not that it lacks practice verification, but it can't be defiled by them. Okay, so this is the line that Dogen's referring to. He says, Nanyue says, it's not that it lacks practice verification, but it can't be defiled by them. So if you want to express it, reality itself, suchness, just this, things as they are, if you want to express it, then practice verification is necessary. This verification of the inherent Buddha nature that is coming through practice. But it, reality itself, suchness, things just as they are, is already presencing regardless of what you may or may not be doing. Therefore, it cannot be defiled. Does this make sense?
Sometimes.
So even if our understanding of practice realization is delusional at that moment, the fact that we're still engaging in practice and this attempted realization is really important. But whether we hit the mark or don't hit the mark, it doesn't change the fact that reality itself is functioning, this totality of the co-functioning of reality. Now, I want to tell you guys something. There's a program that was on Wednesday night on Nova. It's called something like Beautiful Ocean or something along those lines. You should really check this out. They talk about how the ocean is this, the beings in the ocean are these completely interconnected systems, like in ways that it's mind-boggling, in ways that we would never, I didn't know anything about. I'm assuming most of you are not oceanographers, so you probably don't know about this either. But it's really incredible because they just show how this whole functioning works. Like, for example, there are particular places in the ocean that turtles go, and they're cleaning stations. It's like a car wash. And this is in all of the oceans of the world. There's like 5 of them. And these turtles go to one of these places, and these fish that are only, this is this thing they do, they come and they get all over the turtle and they clean up the turtle shell, and then the turtle leaves. And this is not there are other stations for different kinds of turtles, other stations for sharks, other stations for other fish, right? So it's like that kind of stuff is going on all the time. Did you know? I had no idea that there were car washes for turtles. So anyway, they talk about all of these various kinds of interactive events. So to get back to what we're talking about, which is not different, but this, we cannot defile reality itself. We cannot mess it up through our delusion. And yet we must practice. So that's the rest of this, which is, so Nanwei answered, it is not that it lacks practice verification, but it can't be defiled by them. And then Huining said, just this, not defiled, is what the Buddhas bear in mind. Just this, not defiled, is what the Buddhas bear in mind. You're also like this. I am also like this, and all ancestors of India are also like this. So we are all Buddha nature, essentially is what he's saying. We are like this. You are like this. All the Buddhas and ancestors are like this. All the turtles are like this. All the fish that come and clean the turtle shells are like this. All the reefs are like this. And on and on and on. So that is this practice realization is naturally undefiled. And then I want to give you some quotes where Dogen talks about this. And then let's see. Dogen begins the Fasco Gyoji, which is a really wonderful poetic text about sustained practice, especially the opening lines. In the great way of the Buddhas and ancestors, there was always unsurpassed sustained practice. The way circling around without being cut off, bringing forth the mind of Bodhi, practice, Bodhi, and Nirvana without the slightest interval. Sustained practice is the way circling around. So this is this co-functioning interdependence of all of life functioning and practice. Our practice is also interdependent and co-functioning. Therefore, it is not something we force ourselves to do that others force us to do. So it's not something that we're forcing ourselves to do, this practice, or that others force us to do. It is sustained practice that has never been defiled. It is sustained practice that has never been defiled. So this is this way in which the practice and the actualization are dependent upon each other. And so when Dogen talks about sustained practice, he's not just talking about what we're doing as human beings or how we might be trying to practice, cultivate skillful means, wisdom, compassion, but he's talking about this co-functioning of the whole world. He's talking about the fish that clean the turtles' back. He's talking about the turtles. He's talking about the reefs. He's talking about cars. He's talking about everything that's functioning and happening, this great process of life. So that's that practice. We don't know what the practice is of everything in this world, right? I'm not even sure we know what our practice is part of the time, but we're giving it our best effort. So there's this way that this is this sustained practice and this is Buddha nature. And without this sustained practice, there would be nothing. Nothing would be functioning. So in Bendawa, he said, have you not heard that the ancestral masters have said, it's not that it lacks practice and verification, but it can't be defiled by them. So, and then he says, and they have said, one who seeks the way practices the way. So this is this way in which Dogen is really emphasizing that in order for us to actualize, we have to practice. We have to put some effort into it. Because there are some doctrinal ideas in Buddhism that because everything is Buddha nature, you don't have to do anything. Practice is unnecessary. That this is just what's happening. But in our school, that's not true. In our school, we're like, okay, we have to put some effort into it. And isn't that your personal experience? It is mine. I have to put some effort into it. So there are, and sometimes I don't want to put the effort into it. But if you open your eyes and you look around, you see that if you don't put the effort into it, you create suffering. You create suffering from yourself, for yourself, and you create suffering for others. So, and sometimes we can't help that because we just can't see that. But that we keep practicing and making this effort. So that's like super important. And then Dogen, the next line is, going forward in practice is a matter of everydayness. So I think this is pretty simple. To go forward in your practice is to meet each moment that is arising in your life with the mind of practice. Sometimes we just respond and it's absolutely the right thing to do. Sometimes we respond and it's absolutely not the right thing to do. Sometimes it's neither here nor there, but that we go forward, and this going forward is not a sense of gaining idea. It's not a sense of like, I'm gonna, I'm gonna go forward and become enlightened or something like that. I think what he means is that in your life, you just keep practicing. You just go forward and practice. You just keep making that effort. In Gencho Koan, He talks about how, if you think that you've got this down, you think, you're filled up with it. He says, no, that's not true. Actually, you never get it down. It's like there's each moment is always arising. There's each opportunity in each moment. So it's not a static event. And this going forward in practice is a matter of everydayness. Well, where else are you going to practice? I mean, isn't that our everyday life? No matter what we're doing, that's our everyday life. Whether we think it's something special that we don't normally do, that's still our everyday life. If you go to Disneyland, it's still your everyday life. And so, this is the place, here the way it unfolds. This is where we practice. So you should practice. He says you should, he specifically may be talking here in Fukanzazengi about you should practice Zazen every day. And then that would include you should practice suchness without delay. So this way in which to practice suchness is we are making this effort to actualize this verification of Buddha nature. So we just fully engage Zazen, and Zazen can be understood in the way that Dogen's talking about it in Fukanzazengi mostly, which is Zazen as the formal practice of sitting Zazen. But he also says, interestingly, Zazen is not about sitting or lying down. So Zazen can also be understood as the Zazen of your life, right? Because what is Zazen? Zazen is, to use a modern term, an active listening. It's really presence in yourself for what's happening. It's an exercise, if you will, in practicing and grounding yourself where you are, literally, if you're sitting on the ground, literally grounding yourself in reality as it is at that moment. And that's what we're trying to do in general. So I think, I think that this is a difficult practice to do. In Genjo Koan, Dogen wrote, those who greatly realize delusion are Buddhas. So sometimes in Genjo Koan, it sounds like he's talking about different people, but I think what he's talking about has to do with the translation. We are all, sometimes we're in delusion, sometimes we're in realization. So when we are greatly realize our delusion, then our Buddha nature comes forward, right? It's like, if you're like me and you tend to get really impatient, you go, oh, okay, I understand my delusion. One of them is impatience. So when I feel that arising, if I can actually mitigate that and not manifest that in a way that's unskillful, then that's my Buddha mind coming forward, right? That is greatly realized about delusion is your Buddha mind coming forward. And then there are times when we're greatly deluded in realization, which means that realization, it cannot be defiled, right? It cannot be defiled. And yet simultaneously, so that's happening all the time, but that doesn't mean that in the midst of that, we can't be engaged in delusional activity, which we all do, right? That's when you're like not aware. And then he says, there are those who attain realization beyond realization and those who are deluded within deluded. So to attain realization beyond realization is you're not even thinking about it. You're not even, it doesn't have a label. It's just pure response. It's just, you see somebody with 2 bags in their arms filled with bags, you open the door for them. That's realization beyond realization. You don't even think about it. Somebody drops something, you automatically lean over and pick it up and hand it to them. That's what it is. It's not like some kind of woo-woo thing here. So you're really just responding. It's a pure response. And then I think when we're deluded within delusion, it means that we're just totally clueless. It's just, we're just totally caught in whatever it is that we're doing that's unskillful. And then he says, in general, this world and other worlds as well, both in India and China, equally hold the Buddha seal. So this Buddha seal exists equally in this world and other worlds. Buddhism has a mythology about other worlds. In other worlds, in India and in China, equally hold the Buddha seal, and overall prevails the character of the school, which is simply devotion to sitting, total engagement in a mobile sitting. You know, Dogen was very well educated in Buddhism, and he was aware of the Pali Canon, which are the teachings, the earliest teachings we have of Shakyamuni Buddha. Pali Canon is expressing the teachings of the Theravadan schools. Dogen was aware that there were different schools of Buddhism, but in Dogen's mind, there's only one school of Buddhism. There's only one teaching of Buddha, and it's the teaching that he's teaching. So even in when, like in a fast school, like the 37 Factors of Enlightenment, which is a Theravadan early Buddhist teaching, Dogen interprets all 37 factors from the perspective of being a Soto Zen practitioner. So, you know, he says, I'll just tell you this because he says overall prevails the character of this school, which is simply in all realms of Buddhism, what, you know, prevails as the character of the school. It is true that sitting in a meditation, doing meditation is something that is carried through from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, but it is not necessarily at this point the hallmark of every school of Buddhism. Jodo Shin Buddhism, they don't put a lot of emphasis on sitting, right? That's like, it's not what they do. So Dogen has some bias here. And also the sitting that's done in some other schools of Buddhism is not Zazen. They don't have the same instruction that we have. But Pasada has a different instruction on how to do sitting meditation than we do. So I would say that he's a little biased here in his comments. But he is saying simply devotion to sitting, the simple devotion to this practice and this total engagement in a mobile sitting. So for Dogen, he's saying, this is a super, super, super important Dharma gate that we need to engage with in order to manifest actualization. So I think that I'm just going to stop there and say thank you very much, to be continued.